Our story is one that's well known, and it has a point. It has a moral to it about what it means to be a neighbor. There was a pastor who had children in Sunday school, and there was a new Sunday school teacher. So he talked to his son about this new Sunday school teacher. And he said, what do you think about Mrs. White? And the little boy said, who's Mrs. White? He said, your Sunday school teacher. And the little boy said, oh, you mean the woman without morals. The pastor said, what? The woman without morals? What do you mean, the woman without morals? And she said, well, our old Sunday school teacher would always end with, and the moral of the story is, and our current teacher has no moral at all. Today's passage is one where Jesus gets to the moral of the story, he gets to the point about what it means. This lawyer comes to talk to him. In this time, it's not a scribe; it's a moral. It's a lawyer. In the book of Mark, it's a scribe who comes and talks to him. This story is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and it appears to come from 3 different times when Jesus gave this. This was what Jesus said all the time about, and in fact, it's the lawyer that repeats Jesus' words back to him, because he comes to Jesus hoping to trap him and trap him in his own words. And that tells you that Jesus has been saying this. The lawyer knew what Jesus was saying. In fact, we've gone through all of the rabbinic teachings that we have, everything from before the time of Jesus, and this putting these 2 passages together as one passage, or even just putting the 2 passages together, isn't found in any source before Jesus. So after Jesus, a lot of sources do this, but no other source puts this. The first part of it is the Deuteronomy passage that was the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord your is one, that was put in, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and then some add strength. So that was what was on the doorway of the home in every house. It still is. We were watching comedians drinking coffee, the Seinfeld thing, and as they go out, one of the old comedians reaches over and kisses the side of the door, and that's the Shema. Was it Don Wrinkles? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, see, it's a good thing I have her up here with me, or else I'd never remember these things, yeah. So, and so this was, of course, the most popular of passages. He comes and he says to Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And of course, the Shema would be there for many people, but it was also that love your neighbor as yourself was also a very popular one. And there's a story that's told about Rabbi Hillel, who was the great liberal rabbi before the time of Jesus. And some of his students come up to him and they want to sort of trap him, and they say to him, recite the whole law for us. Expecting him to stand there and say it verbatim from memory. And he says, I'll do you one better. I will recite the whole law standing on one foot. Well, they're amazed. And so he stands on one foot and says, love your neighbor as yourself from Leviticus. That is the whole law. Everything else is just commentary. So that was Rabbi Hillel's understanding of the command. What is the greatest commandment? And Jesus takes that but puts it together, and puts it together in one breath. In Matthew, you have the same sort of thing. It says the second is like this when it talks about the 2 commandments. But that word for like this is the word that is the most powerful form of the word to be similar. So he's basically saying the second is the same thing. So in Matthew and Luke, we see they are put together in a way that Jesus probably did. I mean, this comes from the mouth of Jesus. And did, we believe, over and over and over again. This was some of the basic teachings that Jesus had, that we love God and that we love our neighbor as ourselves. But the lawyer really isn't interested in hearing the truth from Jesus. The lawyer's trying to catch him. And so the lawyer knows that Jesus believes this, And so a trap is set. And the trap is, who is my neighbor? In English, maybe the neighbor's just the person who lives next door. Most of us think of the people here in the congregation as neighbors, or to be neighborly, that we need to be neighborly together. And for this lawyer, his understanding of neighbor was pretty limited. It was just people who believed like he did. And in fact, there are writings of the Pharisees that say that the common person can't be their neighbor, because they don't live like Pharisees, so they can't be neighbor. The common man, they would say, is not fit to be neighbor. And of course that wasn't Jesus. That's probably the thought of and it is important that we remember to support one another and hold each other up. When we were at Wesley, we're going to be singing "Leaning on the Everlasting Arms." We were singing that anthem, and the choir was 3 rows, 2 of women and 1 of men in the back. And as they sang, the women in the middle row started to shift back and forth. And they shifted back and forth, leaning. And then one of them at the end leaned too hard. And the whole middle row of the choir went down. Boom! All the way down. Now, these are elderly women, a lot of them, and the music stops and the whole church goes, and then they realized all the women were laughing, at the top, the top of their lungs. And so the congregation went on. Leaning, I guess they stand together, they fall together, right? Yeah. But we're called on to lift each other up. We are called on to surround each other with love and to understand that we are neighbors together. But Jesus, of course, believes even more than that. Jesus takes the lawyer beyond with this story of the Good Samaritan. Now, a point that needs to be made is that people hated Samaritans. Samaritans were from that area where the Assyrians in the 700s BC had taken the people of Israel that they could and shipped them off to another country, and taken people from other countries and stuck them into to Israel and made sure that the people intermarried. And so the people of Jerusalem and that area in the south said, those people in the north, they're all just scum that are from intermarriages with pagans from other lands. And so they would have nothing to do with them. That's why it was dangerous for a Jewish man to walk through Samaria. At one point he says, we're going to go through Samaria, and the disciples go, what? No, we don't want to go through there. And what they're saying is that's not safe to go through it. But Jesus taught in Samaria too. He taught and healed in Samaria. So Jesus says, no, we're going to go through Samaria too. Those hated Samaritans were ones that received the teaching and the miracles and the love of Jesus as well. And when the disciples go there later on, they're amazed to find that there's already believers in Jesus all through Samaria. Now, you have this woman at the well from John 4. And it says she went and told everyone. And so she becomes sort of the first evangelist for Jesus, going out across Samaria, spreading the word about Jesus Christ. And so it's this Samaritan, and Jesus is talking, the people still hate the Samaritans. And he says, okay, there was a priest walking along. And the road between Jericho and Jerusalem, 17 miles, it goes up 3,300 feet. It's a very rough road, very dry road. Some of you have ridden in a bus on it, I'm sure, and can testify to what it still looks like. It's deserty area between Jericho and Jerusalem. People didn't hang out there unless they were thieves. They would jump out there. So when it says that it just so happened a priest was coming by, what that word really means is amazing. A priest was walking by. What's the priest doing walking by? Well, Jericho had a lot of priests who live in Jericho on their off time. They would go to Jericho. And so it's natural, but they wouldn't go by themselves. There'd be a group of priests going. You didn't travel by yourself. It wasn't safe. But a priest comes along by himself. And what does he do? He walks on the other side. We don't know if he is afraid he's a dead man and he doesn't want to be ritually unclean. touching him. It might be that, that poor guy, he's dead. I'll pray for him as I walk on as fast as possible. We don't know. We don't know what it is, but he walks by. And a Levite comes along. Now, at the time of Jesus, the Levites were both lawyers and officials, sort of the lay minister of the temple would be, but if you wanted to put it in modern terms. And he walks by on the other side. So we have the priest and this lawyer sort going by on the other side, and there's a third one coming. There always is in storytelling, and the people are going, oh yeah. And it's going to be the common man comes along and reaches out and helps this poor guy. And it's not. It's a Samaritan. And so he not only catches the lawyer by surprise, he catches everyone there listening by surprise. Because it's this hated Samaritan. During the 50s, it would have been a communist, walking by and helping him out. And he puts him on his own animal and pays his own money and pays extra money to make sure he is cared for. And Jesus says, who is the neighbor? And the lawyer can't even say the Samaritan. The lawyer's still holding that hate in his heart. And he says, I guess the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus says, right. But then what does he say? Do it. It's one thing to sit around and talk about religion. It's one thing to sit around and say which law is what. It's one thing to sit and discuss, and it's another thing to do. Go out and do it. And we are called on to go out and do it. When, and I'm going to close with a story about when we were the man alongside the road. When you think about it, he doesn't say a Samaritan man or a Jewish man or a Greek man or anything. And so it's an everyman. It can be all of us laying alongside the road. Well, Teresa and I were the man alongside the road because I have this beautiful old car that's sitting in the backyard of a friend, completely unable to drive it now. But back, when we were first married, we could take it on trips, and we had the kids, and we'd shove them all in the back, and the kids would back then you could sleep back there in the back. It was great. We were coming back from the mountains. Fortunately, we didn't have the kids with us. It was Teresa and I who went out and started the car and tried to drive it, and it went clank, 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 clank. And I said, we'll make it home. And we made it to a shopping center that looked completely run down and closed when the car finally quit. In Fresno. In the summer, hotter than it was yesterday. And so I got the car into the shade, and I said, okay, I can fix this. And I said, it's a U-joint that's out. We'll just have to pull out the U-joint and call a taxi or something to get to a parts store. I can do this. So I got underneath and saw something that I just completely could not even recognize. The Travelall, Travelall is the big truck company. And so the engines are not like car engines because they're truck engines. And so it was not what I was expecting. And I was getting angry and I was getting frustrated looking at this underneath, trying to figure out how to replace the U-joint on this. It wasn't, I don't know what made me think I could replace a U-joint without jacking up the car anyway. But I thought I could do it, and I was angry. And Teresa walked away because I was probably yelling at her. And she sat on the steps in front of this blood bank, one of those private ones where you could go and sell your platelets or your blood. And so she was sitting there on the steps, and she was praying, gracious God, help us, Lord, help us, over and over again. And somebody shook her shoulder shoulder, and it was this crazy lady. And she said, oh no, what's happening? As if things weren't bad enough, there's this crazy lady shaking my shoulder when I'm trying to pray. And the lady said, what's wrong? And she said, oh, our car broke down, and my husband thinks he can fix it, but I don't know what to do. And this crazy lady, turns out she was a meth addict who was selling her platelets to get money for it here in this thing. And makes you think twice, doesn't you, about platelets? Yeah. But in any case, and she says to Teresa, maybe I can help. And Teresa listens, and she says, I used to date a tow truck driver. And it comes out that she dated him before she was on meth, and life was a meth. She said, let's call him and see if he can help you. And Teresa was ready to say, forget it. And then she remembered she had just been praying for help. Her prayer for help had been interrupted by this crazy lady, and maybe she better listen. And she said, okay. Back then it was payphones. You have to find a dime or maybe even a quarter at that point. I don't know. And so she comes over to talk to me, and I'm still angry, and I'm working under the car. How am I ever going to fix this? There's no way I can understand what's going on here. It turns out they don't have U-joints. They have bell housings. So I completely didn't know what I was talking about anyway. And she says, this lady says she can help us. And I say, no, don't bother me. And she goes, I was praying, and she came. What do you say to that? I don't care that you were praying. You can't say that. And I have an understanding of prayer that God does respond. And, it's like, okay, we'll listen to her. So we call up her friend who says he'll come and get us. We tell him he doesn't have much money. He says, I'll tow it to a shop. We say there's no way we can pay for it to go to a shop. He says, my next door neighbor is one of those guys that's out on the road driving, and he fixes big 18-wheelers out on the freeway. I'll bet you he will know what is wrong with your International Harvester. And so he tows us to his house. The neighbor comes over and says, you have this bell housing thing. I think I know a junkyard where they might have one. And he drives off and gets the part, and he brings it, and the tow truck's driver is just completely wonderful, and she makes us lunch, and we sit around and talk, sipping on iced tea, while this neighbor works on our car, and we drive away for only $150. And we drove down the freeway back home away from Fresno and looked at each other and burst into tears. You see, we met the Good Samaritan. It was a crazy lady and a truck repairman. We met them alongside the road, and God's grace filled that place. Amen.